for joining us today. Today we're going to have an amazing afternoon with Hilary and Nicole, where we learn more about how to achieve healthy sleep. First, let's take a couple of moments to talk about our sponsor, Yourlearner.com. It is an easy-to-use app that helps practitioners to create a centralized and personalized intervention. It offers plan creation, scheduling, secure live communication, file storage, task manager, invoicing, tracking work hours, and much more. Our team is a group of therapy provider, software engineer, researcher, designer, and much more. We all passionate about increasing access to intervention and improving the life of children with autism. So please check our website and sign up today. Join our mailing list for more information about the free events, resources that we provide. Also follow us on social media. Without further ado, let me introduce our amazing speakers, Nicole and Hilary. They are both a behavioral analyst and listed as Registered Autism Service Provider in BC.
As we go through the presentation, we do like to keep it fairly casual. You're welcome to drop comments or questions into the chat. You're welcome to show your face if you're comfortable. We have some slides to go through. We're going to go through basically sleep architecture, what it is and why it's important, because that's important to understand when you're treating sleep. So just some quick tips and sort of basics to understand there. And then we'll go through a little bit of what we do and how we do it. And we have a couple of case studies we can go through as well, so we can show you some plans that we've used to help a couple of kids. Everything that we do is individualized, so there's no cookie cutter. Each sleep plan looks different, but we can kind of go through a couple so you get a feel for what we do. And then we can go from there. If anybody has questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on it.
Oops. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it was working. Okay. I think we have a couple polls though to get to know everyone that's here. This is one of our favorite quotes, just because sleep is really one of the most important things we can do for our overall health, both for us as adults and kids and teens. We can't survive without it, unfortunately. So let's try to make the most of it. Hilary, you're gonna monitor the chat too. Mm-hmm. I have so many good things going on. I can't see it all. Okay, perfect. So today's plan, this is just a quick preview of what we're going to chat about. We're going to go through a little, we kind of talked a little bit about us, so probably slide through that. We're going to go do a breakdown of sleep, so a little bit about the science behind it, as well as talk about it through that behavior analytic lens, so that ABC framework and how we see sleep. Some common sleep problems, common sleep treatments, how we approach those different problems, some case examples of what it looks like, and then time for Q&A. So, but of course, if you have questions throughout, we're happy to answer. And, or if you want to save them till the end, that's fine too. And just throw them in the chat. All right. Oh. Well, there's us, but we talked about us already, so I'm just going to scooch on over. Okay, perfect. So why tackle sleep? Why should we tackle this beast? It's hard to make these changes, especially if we are tired, but it is really important. Lack of sleep is pretty common across everybody. I think the World Health Organization has declared an epidemic around sleep. Adults are sleeping less than they did years ago, and teens are sleeping much less, and kids as well. Unsure of why, but I'm sure we can do some guesses around that. But I think just our lifestyle has changed so much in the past 50 years. And sleep is really the foundation of health. So they talk about the pillars of health. As we've learned more and more about sleep, we see the pillars there. So physical activity, eating, I'm trying to remember the other pillars, but sleep is on the bottom. Like, sleep is our foundation. If sleep isn't solid, all those other parts start to crumble as well. So yeah, that's why it's another good reason why we tackle sleep. And I mean, everybody here might know, but there's some pretty strong side effects of when we don't sleep. Sleep deprivation can mean 1 hour less than what we're supposed to get. I think today I might be a little bit because last night I woke up and I was up for a little while. But sleep deprivation can increase irritability. It can impact our memory and learning. Our immune system can start to crumble if we're not sleeping well, attention, and so much more. So there's a lot of scary side effects when it comes to sleep deprivation. Okay. Hilary, is there anything you wanted to add? Okay. I'll let you jump in.
Sure.
We'll share. We'll go back and forth.
Well, that's always fun. Okay, so
Yeah.
how much should we sleep? This often surprises people. Keep in mind, under 5 years old, these are going to include naps, these numbers here. But really, we should be sleeping as adults anywhere from 7 to 9 hours. Our teens should be sleeping 8 to 10 hours. School age kids should be sleeping anywhere from 9 to 12. I'm not sure what the age range is here. You're welcome to put that in the chat so we have an idea of how old. You guys don't have to say how old you are if it's your sleep problem, but if you want to throw in for your kids how old they are so we get an idea of an age range, this piece is really important. And there is a range because some people can go about their day on the lower end. So, some kids, let's say a 7-year-old, may be okay with 9 hours sleep. Another may need 12 hours sleep. And so when we think about sleep treatment and fixing sleep, that's one of the things we need to figure out is, what's your optimal sleep duration where you can make it through your day. And you're looking at levels of irritability. You're looking at just daily functioning. Can you regulate your emotions at age level or at your ability? Are you able to attend at age level or at your ability? Often what we find is when kids are sleep deprived and then have healthy sleep, you see attention increase. You see their ability to emotionally regulate, get a little bit better. All of these things like sleep, I feel really needs to be a part of any support package for kids in general. If they're not sleeping, fix that first because all else will fall into place. There's actually research when you think about weight loss, for example, if you're trying to lose weight and you're not sleeping, those two things don't go together. If you are sleeping better, you will actually see better results. So sleep is one of those things that you really need to tackle first if there's a problem. The other question we usually tie into the next slide is, what does your sleep look like? Where are you at in your sleep architecture, meaning your sleep cycle? And there's a bunch of cycles that you go through. Basically, you can kind of rack them up to deep sleep and light sleep. Your deeper sleep is that restorative sleep. REM sleep is what you need to build those skills when it comes to emotional regulation. Think of sleep like a dishwasher. It washes out all the stuff you don't need, and it makes everything else just prettier. It makes it work better. So you end up with whatever you learned in that day going from short term to long term. You end up whatever, there's research telling us too that if you've experienced maybe a horrible day, even perhaps trauma in your day, and you go to sleep, like you have a good night's sleep, that can help you recover. So sleep can be one of those things that, depending on where you are and if you're hitting all of your sleep cycles, can be not only restorative, but healing. And that's a really important piece. So these sleep cycles, I'm not going to get into them too much, but it's important that you're going through all of them. And one thing to note is your REM sleep, 80% of it is actually the tail end of the morning. So if you can see Nicole's cursor there, the tiny little thing moving. Your REM, your deep sleep is in the first half of the night, and your REM sleep is in the latter half of the night. So if you think of those days when maybe you're woken up early, or you have to wake your child up earlier than they would typically wake up, you're encroaching in their REM sleep. And so you're more likely to wake up a bit grumpy, maybe edgier that day, because you haven't gotten all the sleep that you need throughout your sleep cycles, which is pretty important. You can talk about sleep pressure because you like talking about that part.
Beautiful. Okay. So our body has these natural rhythms throughout the day, and they've been with us as far as we remember, evolution has kept them around. And we have two processes going. So we've got, in this diagram, they show us the circadian rhythm. So this one's pretty common knowledge. We know a lot about this. Our body's on a clock. It has an internal clock that runs around, oh, I had someone pop in. It runs around 24 plus hours. So throughout the day, I'm just going to ask everyone to stop video. There we go. Perfect. This is, it's distracting. Oh, we still have someone coming in on the video.
That's okay. Just keep going.
Okay, perfect.
Switch air.
Getting distracted. Sorry about that, guys. So we have our circadian rhythm, which is 24 plus hours, which over time, so we're always moving through that rhythm. And our body, our organs, our brain, we're all on that same clock. And then we also have this other process, and this one helps with sleep. This one is called, it's run by adenosine. So adenosine is a neurotransmitter that builds up in our body. It starts really low in the morning, really low in the morning, and it slowly builds over time. And so this sleep pressure is what we really want to create and make sure we're taking advantage of, because this helps us, our body, to cue that we're tired and that it's time to go to bed. There's a few things that can interrupt this, and we talk about that today, and we give some tips on how to really optimize the sleep pressure. And one of them is caffeine. So when it comes to adenosine, caffeine is our worst enemy because it blocks the production of, or not the production, it just blocks our body's ability to recognize it. And so it can really impact our many different things, really. With caffeine, it blocks our adenosine, which then we're not tired anymore, and then it comes back full on later on. When it comes to caffeine, it can really impact pretty much everything. So this is our favorite slide because I'm not a huge coffee drinker, but I do drink my fair share of tea. But caffeine can really impact our ability to function. So as you see here, oh, should I put my coffee down? No, Candace, please drink away. We can talk about how caffeine and when's the best time to drink it. But caffeine really can impact our ability to attend, our ability to plan. As you see here, this spider, like with all these other drugs, the spider had a really hard time when on caffeine. When it comes to caffeine though, our rule of thumb is 12, well, I guess it's 12 now, but give yourself like maybe before 2, you want to give yourself enough time for the caffeine to burn off before it's time to go to sleep, because caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours, which means after 5 to 6 hours, there's still half of the caffeine left, and then so it slowly burns down. And it can impact, as the previous slide, the different, like your deep sleep. So that's stage 3, 4. So how much deep sleep you get. Some people say they're not affected. I'd like to go for a sleep study and try it out to prove it, but I like to make that recommendation when it comes to caffeine. Okay.
I think what happens when people say they're not affected is they can still sleep, and you can still sleep.
Yeah. The quality is
just your quality isn't that great, so you can still fall asleep. And I think we forget that caffeine is actually a drug. It's a stimulant. Mm-hmm. And so this picture is spiders on different various drugs. And if you look at caffeine, it's the most disjointed. So we have to remember that that is what it is. And it's often found in different foods that we may not realize. And so I would really encourage everybody, don't go down the Google rabbit hole, but there are foods that you may not realize have caffeine in it. Some medications have caffeine in it, like cold medications, etc. They have caffeine in them. So just keeping in mind that there's ways that kids can be ingesting caffeine, and it's not an intention. It's not that you're actually giving them caffeine, but it's there. And then you wonder why they're wide awake later. And it's because they've I found that with one of my kids was very sensitive to one cough medication we were giving, and we realized that another one was fine. And when we looked really at the ingredients, one of them actually had caffeine in it. And so when it came to bedtime, he wasn't tired, which made for a lovely night. So setting up healthy sleep is really important. And there's some main areas that we look at when we talk about healthy sleep and sleep hygiene. One is making sure that your circadian rhythm is really healthy, and we've talked about that. Physical activity is a really important component of healthy sleep. So making sure you're physically active in the day and active to the point where your heart rate's up. Light is huge. That is, for us here, that is what controls our body clock, is light. Our body clock runs on a 24-hour plus cycle, right? But we know the Earth is on a 24-hour rotation, but our body clocks are actually on a bit of a longer rotation. But what controls our body clock is light, right? There was a researchers that went into a cave, a really, really, really dark cave, and they kind of went through their general routines. They slept, and based on the data, realized that they actually stayed on a really good rhythm. They just added 15 minutes every day because they weren't being cued by light. So light is so important when it comes to managing your circadian rhythm, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then your eating routines. It is not uncommon for autistic kids to have issues around whether it's eating, feeding, gastro, etc. And that can really impact your sleep cycle. And we can talk a little bit more about that as well, I think, or do I talk about it here? I can't remember.
It'll come up.
We can talk for hours on sleep, so I try to pace myself.
Yeah. If there's any questions, please throw them in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So sleep through our lens. So as behavior analysts, we look at our original training is through, well, I mean, it's through behavior. So we look at it from a behavior perspective. And when we broke it down and when we learned about sleep, we were actually this lens and this breakdown made so much sense to us. So what we look at is what happens, like what is the behavior that we're targeting? And when it comes to sleep, it's that act of falling asleep. So it's that rolling over, closing our eyes, and letting our body just sink into that sleep cycle. What we have learned is that addressing sleep, we really have to tackle before. So what happens before? How can we set up, what do we need to have in the environment to set our body up for success to engage in that behavior of falling asleep? So things like cool temperature, dim lighting, laying down in bed, that bedtime routine is all very, very important to get here. And then sleep itself is so powerful that our body wants more of it, and it starts to it's the reinforcer in the equation. It's the thing that will increase the likelihood of falling asleep in the future. So it all ties together and it comes into this loop, and we've got our cool temperature, falling asleep, sleep. And then we look at it from that lens. Hilary, is there anything you want to add?
I think it's really helped to have, because behavior analysis, those two words, behavior analysis is answering why something happens. That's what that is. And for sleep, it's really important to understand why sleep isn't happening. And that ties into common sleep problems that we come across. Is it because they're waking at night? Is it because they're having trouble falling asleep? Is there something in the day that isn't promoting healthy sleep? So a lot of what we do are what would be called antecedent interventions. A lot of what we do is look at, well, how can we proactively set up a healthy sleep cycle so that a child is more likely to fall asleep? Disruptive behavior sometimes pops up too at bedtime. That's what I had to tackle with my little one. When I was, my two kids, my older one had sleep problems, and I looked at every single book I could find or that I could manage to read because I was tired, but I looked at all these parenting books of what I could do with sleep, and none of it really clicked with me, and I felt like I was doing all of it, and it kind of drove me a little nuts. And then it didn't occur to me to look into my own field for whatever reason. And when I did that, I started sleep training with my second. And I think understanding this framework that sleep is actually the thing that perpetuates more sleep. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that saying, sleep begets sleep. So you should let your kids nap a little longer. Like sleep just promotes sleep. And that's actually true, because once your body gets into that natural rhythm and habit of sleeping well, it wants to keep doing that. And so it will, as long as all other conditions are how it needs to be. So once we achieve healthy sleep, kids tend to stick to that because that's what their body is seeking out, which is a huge help for us to understand it from that perspective. And I think it's a different lens, but it's one that's really helped us tackle some pretty significant sleep problems just by having that larger lens, and then having the expertise in sleep and child development and understanding what would be typical, what would be appropriate for that age, and then understanding sleep itself and how that works. So combining all of that has been a huge help in understanding sleep and then helping others with it as well. The common sleep problems in general is it a myth that you need to wake up a child from a nap so they can sleep at night? No. Yes and no. Depends. Naps should be timed with enough. So we talked a little bit about sleep pressure. So one sleep problem that I was helping a family with is that their child napped, but napped at like 5 in the evening. And then bedtime ended up being midnight, 1 o'clock, because at a typical bedtime, the child wasn't tired. And that's because there wasn't enough sleep pressure. So napping, having good solid naps at a decent time in the day can promote sleep later at night, yes. But what you need to consider is your total duration. So making sure that if a child is sleeping 2 hours, you need to kind of subtract that from the total sleep they should be getting and make sure that's what they're getting at night. So there is a little bit of making sure it's even across the board, because if you dip into your sleep pressure, it makes it harder for you to fall asleep at night. And if you dip too much into your sleep duration, you're going to run into a child that's waking up too early in the morning, or it maybe has night wakings and their sleep isn't consolidated. If that makes sense. Our most common sleep problems I talked about a little bit already. So the night wakings, waking up too early, bedtime not going well, or delayed onset to sleep. So these can all be issues that we run into for various reasons. And again, our job is kind of to answer the why. And it's hard to say what the why is because it varies for every single kid. But one of the main things that could be popping up is what we call sleep dependencies. And sleep dependencies can be healthy and unhealthy. We all have sleep dependencies. We all have routines. We all have things that we do before sleep. And I think one of the pieces for hitting my teens, an energy shot to a 10 just before bedtime, is that common? Can be, but I'm going to finish this and come back to that if that's okay. So one of the things that pop up with sleep dependencies is the unhealthy ones. And we've got a picture of a bottle there. We've got a picture of an iPad. We've got a picture of food. Sleep dependencies are things that you have to have. Those conditions under which I fall asleep have to be there. And I have a pillow I like, but that's a pretty reasonable sleep dependency because I can take it with me if I go somewhere. Nothing usually happens to it. So it's not like it's going to get lost or it's going to get wrecked or anything like that. So that's fairly healthy sleep dependency. One of the sleep dependencies that my little one had was a soother, which is very common for babies, but also me. So I had to, one, figure out how to tackle the soother part, which for me was just throwing 20 of them in the crib and then teaching him how to pick them up. And then transferring without me, I just started to use a blanket, would rock him, and then put him down with the blanket, which now smelled like me. And that became his lovey. And he carried that around for a long time, actually, and just found them. He's 4, and he just found his stash of loveys in his closet and pulled them out and hung out with them for a while. So there can be sleep dependencies that interfere with sleep. If a child is used to falling asleep with a parent and then wakes at night and the parent isn't there, they're going to seek out the parent because that's how I fell asleep. So that's where sleep dependencies can be problematic. If you always go to bed with a full stomach, if you always go to bed or to sleep with a bottle, if there's always a TV on, if there's always lights on, if there's certain sounds going on, those conditions need to be replicated in the middle of the night. We all wake up at night. If you caught the dip in the sleep cycles that we showed you, we all wake up at least once or twice in our sleep cycles. we don't remember because we usually go right back to sleep. But sometimes we don't. And if we don't, and we're seeking out that thing that's missing, we end up with a longer night waking, and that can be problematic. Or if that thing doesn't exist, that can be problematic, meaning we can't have dinner at 4 o'clock in the morning so that we can go back to sleep. That can be problematic. So there's the night wakings can often be directed back to not learning to fall asleep on your own at bedtime. That can often be a problem. Not always, but sometimes. So we usually have to answer the why, and that has a lot to do with sleep dependencies. It's one of the first things that we look at when there are sleep problems. So that might be something for you guys to take away from this, is to kind of really think about what happens in the bedtime routine that isn't there in the middle of the night. And that may be an answer to why there's a problem with night waking, is that thing that's there when I go to sleep isn't there when I wake up. And that can be a problem. Does that make sense? Can anybody think of sleep dependencies? Guided meditation. So that's a sound machine, basically. And sound machines can be healthy dependencies as long as they play at the same volume and the exact same noise throughout. If they vary, if it goes from like ocean to birds to something else through the night, you're likely to wake up with the change in sound, and that can actually cause night waking. So as long as it's the same sound, and it's usually recommended that the noise machine is loud enough that you could hear it outside the bedroom. That way it actually blocks out other noises. Or you can put it outside the bedroom if maybe the child doesn't like it in the room. You can also put it outside the door, but it should be loud enough to cover off any other noises. But those can be healthy sleep dependencies.
And I think too, Candace, to your point of the meditation, if the meditative music, if that works for you and you're staying asleep and you're in that deep sleep and you're feeling rested in the morning, then it might be effective for you too. Those ones. Because I don't know what the meditative music, if they loop or not. Like what that sounds like in Spotify.
That's good.
Yeah. Hilary, did you want to answer that question? The teen energy shot to a 10 just before bed?
We're hitting his teens. My son's energy shot to a 10 just before bedtime. So not currently. Or do you mean now that's happening? Like right before bedtime, his energy goes up. Sometimes that's a second wind, which is a real thing. You can get into what's called a forbidden zone of sleep, which is probably the worst time to put your child to sleep, which would be you've already surpassed their sweet spot of when they're tired and should be going to sleep. You've kind of surpassed that. And now they're into squirrely mode. And you're kind of in that forbidden zone where they're not going to sleep at that point. You almost have to wait it out until you see those sleepy signs happening again. It's possible that's what happens, is that the bedtime was just a little bit off for what he needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll keep going, and then Candace, feel free to answer at any time. When it comes to sleep problems, though, it's usually never just one, and you'll see that in our case studies. There's usually multiple things going on, and so it's tackling and creating a plan that addresses each of those sleep problems. The first thing is, when it comes to treating sleep, though, is to rule out anything medical. So some examples might be snoring. That's a common one that we always ask, and we want to make sure kids aren't snoring, because kids or even adults shouldn't be really snoring. It means something's blocking your airway when you're sleeping, and that's that sound is the muscle, just the air trying to pass through a closed gap. So always wanting to rule that out, any swollen tonsils or adenoids as well. Seizures, restless leg, iron deficiencies. These are all things that impact sleep medically. So before tackling it, being sure that everything is fine internally, and then taking a behavioral approach and attacking the sleep problem. And really, anything can happen once we start treating sleep. So that support is helpful.
We're going to get to melatonin.
Yes,
yeah.
We'll get to melatonin for sure. Okay. Sleep and autism. when it comes to the research and just kind of learning about how common it is in the autistic community, the prevalence is pretty high. And so when it comes to sleep, it might be a skill deficit. So that is that lack of knowing how to fall asleep and maybe never learned. And this can go for a lot of people. I feel like I also had that issue. There might be a physiological component. So there is research to show that with a diagnosis of autism, there may be some atypical circadian rhythm, something going on there, lower levels of melatonin, which can impact our ability to fall asleep. Impaired REM stages, so not getting as much REM sleep or maybe not getting as much deep sleep, which can impact the quality of the sleep that's being achieved. And then weaker circadian rhythm cues, so unable to, the cues that are in the natural environment that like light and like meals and things like that, they might not be, their body isn't cued as much as it is for others. So, and then some interfering behaviors that can get in the way of sleep. So that might be what I've noticed is sometimes interfering behaviors can really increase cortisol levels. And so like stress, your body's under stress. And if that happens, then our bodies aren't ready for sleep. So, yeah. See this list restorative. That's interesting. Yeah, definitely with food, trying to make sure that you're giving yourself lots of time to between your last meal and falling asleep is really important. It can impact your quality of sleep for sure. Some people, I used to say that I slept better on a full stomach, but then I learned pretty quickly as I started diving into sleep that that wasn't so good for my stomach and for my gut in general. And so that's definitely something to, and that's interesting the Fitbit pick that up. I do find the Fitbit is awesome for data. The heart rate is higher in the earlier part. Yeah, body's working hard to digest that food.
And your digestive system actually shuts off during sleep.
Yeah, it needs to go to sleep too, repair.
Yeah. So when you put too much into your tummy before bed, like your digestive system goes a little crazy trying to get rid of it. It can include milk. Yeah, your digestive system in general shuts down during sleep.
Anything other than water?
Yeah. So anything other than water, it's going to have a harder time digesting. You know, is a glass of milk before bed going to make or break your sleep? Probably not. But it might be a variable to look at if all else is not really working, is to really start to fine tune, because you just never know. Everybody processes differently. Same with caffeine, everybody's liver processes at different rates. And so some people, caffeine passes through quite quickly and other people it doesn't. It's a little bit slower to process. Everybody sort of has different rates of doing things. So in general, what we do is we assess, so we answer that why, we develop a plan. The plan is based on parent goals. It's not us telling you what sleep should look like. We're guiding you because there's always different considerations when it comes to sleep, family life, culture, etc. So the plan is really based on conversation and making sure that we're providing the information that's needed and coming up with a plan that will work, but one that's also doable. We provide support, so we review the plan. We do all of this remotely, so our model is entirely remote. So we talk with you about the plan, fine tune it, make sure all questions are answered. We can try to role play. We do all sorts of stuff to make sure that you're confident. We support the first few nights, so either messaging or phone. We provide direct support, and then move into the maintenance phase. And we typically find within the first week or two that there's improvements in sleep, and we're moving into maintenance fairly quickly, depending on how extensive the plan is and how quickly we're kind of moving into it.
All right. So we'll run through some of these case studies, and then we'll get to our questions. So I noticed it's 12:41 already. Okay. So we have 2 cases that we're going to show today and kind of go through. So feel free again to drop any questions in the.
Just keep going, Nicole.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions in the chat? So for case number 1, this was a young little one, and the problems that we found were there was a sleep dependency. So we needed to come up with I'm just going to delete that. Come up with a plan to fade that out. also addressing night wakings. And then there was 2 homes in this case, so we needed to generalize to both homes. As you can see here, so this one, the protocol that we used, or the strategy to fade out the parent, so the parent was the sleep dependency in this case, was something we call time-based visiting, which is really time trips and slowly increasing the duration the parent's out of the room so the child gets used to just staying in bed. And we started the first night. It took a while to get there, and then over time we were able to reduce the amount of trips, and I think now it still is maintained into a year later. So that's nice, and he's sleeping on his own in his bed. Again, there were night wakings too. So we have our baseline. So before we started, there's night wakings here, and the duration of the night wakings range. They were sometimes a couple hours, up wide awake, wanting to play, have snack. So we really needed, it was pretty disruptive for the household. So working through that, by fading out the sleep dependency, we were able to see night wakings go down because the student had learned to fall asleep on their own, which is fantastic. And again, still night wakings, they pop up every now and then, but the parents, they know how to tackle it now. So it's maintained still. I don't think he wakes up too much.
No.
And this one was just a number of visits.
Yeah, and there were a couple of hiccups with sleep just in the last year, and mom had the tools and knew what to do. So she knew what she had to address, and she knew kind of how to do it. So she was able to get sleep on track, which was good. Just with less activity and kind of stuff going on in the last year, it was a bit harder. Yeah. And the result of this one is we started in one home. We did eventually transfer it to the second home once it was confident in the other one. Everything in the other home stayed business as usual. And overall, there's success, and it still maintains today. So the key there was teaching the student to fall asleep on their own. And it worked really well. I think he enjoys sleeping in his own bed now. Okay, case number 2. This one was a tricky one. This was a 5-year-old, and they had never slept in their own bed before. So we were teaching that from scratch, and there was some sleep dependencies. So the parents, again, had to be present for the whole night in order to stay asleep. There was early wakings and night wakings. So some really brutal early mornings and some long wakings in the night. And then increasing sleep duration because sleep wasn't at age appropriate amounts. And we again started with the visits. So fading out that parent. This one had a lot of visits compared to the last one that you saw. And working through that, we had like over 200 the first night. It was tough, but we were able to support them through it. And the student learned pretty quickly. The second night, it was half that. And then the third night, just dropping. The student, then I think around day 4, they're just kicking the parents out of the room. It's like, okay, bye. Again, once fading out the parents, we did notice that there was still some inconsistencies with sleep. And that's the nice thing about data. And we really enjoy using data to help make decisions because it gives us a clear picture of if what we're doing is effective. In this one, we still saw night wakings continue even though we had faded out the parent. So we had to kind of come back to the drawing board. And we implemented something called sleep restriction, which is consolidating sleep and teaching the student to fall asleep independently or teach the student to sleep consolidated because there's still some interrupted sleep cycles. As you can see here, after we fade the parent out, it's still quite up and down. And then once we implemented sleep restriction, it just slowly increased to an age-appropriate amount. So that one was fun. And the parents did amazing. And I think the support is just so key. It can be tricky sometimes. This was the one where, too, we got a message afterwards telling us that the school had reported.
Oh, yeah.
She was in a better mood. She was participating more. She was more engaged, and she seemed emotionally regulated during the day. And there was all of sort of this positive feedback. She was eating better. So I think this was a situation where she was really, even though she was technically sleeping through the night with parents, she wasn't getting good sleep because she was restless and she was moving around, or she would wake up when they woke up. And I think just nobody was getting good sleep. And you could tell too, I think this was one where mom just looked exhausted when we came in. So we were really proud of her when she pushed through and did some of the hard stuff when it came to kind of getting sleep back on track. Before I touch into the slide, I'm just going to quickly answer a question. I didn't realize Facebook Live is on, and there's a question from Facebook Live. So is 5 hours for adults not enough sleep? And my answer to that would be likely. No, it's not enough sleep. Typically adults, you need 6 to 9 hours, usually 7 to 9. Again, some people can do 7, some people can do 9 and be okay. But even 1 less hour is technically sleep deprivation. You're actually functioning at the level of being legally intoxicated. That is the equivalent to having a beer or a glass of wine. Your reaction time is less. Your ability to remember and learn and retain is a little bit impaired. It's more difficult to regulate your emotion. You may be a little bit more impulsive, particularly if that carries on over time. So 5 is on the lower end for adults for sure. And the other question is, will night terrors be addressed? Not specifically in this presentation. We try to keep it kind of general, and night terrors can tie into medical issues as well. So we typically don't touch on that in the presentation, but we're happy to talk about it afterwards. Sleep and medication. So it's not uncommon for us to hear that, a parent has been told that their child is autistic and will never sleep. And usually the recommendation is melatonin or another medication whose side effect is usually sleep, such as clonidine. And I think when we start working with a family, these are one of the things that we really evaluate, is answering again that why. So why are we not sleeping, but also why are we on the medication? So it's difficult to know what the true sleep problem is when there's medication involved, because often it masks the true sleep problem. And understandably, that is why the medication's in place in the first place, is so that everyone can sleep. So we get that. But to really understand what's going on, sometimes that medication has to be faded off to address the sleep problem. Because if you address the sleep problem when a child is on medication, at some point you're going to have to fade that medication out unless it's serving a different purpose. And then you're going to run into a sleep problem. Particularly with melatonin, that's very commonly recommended. And there's some things to know about melatonin, and I can put a link in the chat for you guys. Melatonin is a synthetic hormone, so it's meant to replicate, or it's meant to replace your naturally producing melatonin in your body. And you actually don't produce as much as is usually recommended. So the doses that are typically recommended are higher than what your body would naturally produce. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're using melatonin, is dosage, making sure that it's under 3 milligrams, particularly for kids. The other thing to keep in mind is melatonin is specific for sleep onset. So it creates conditions under which you fall asleep. Melatonin is the starter pistol of sleep. So it doesn't do anything other than signal the rest of your system it is time to start sleeping. So it doesn't keep you asleep. So if an issue is night waking, melatonin is not going to help. If anything, it could actually cause night waking when you start to take a hormone that your body's already producing. And you'd have to go for a sleep study and testing to know what your level of melatonin is. You can actually start to interfere with its natural production, and now you're causing a whole other problem. And melatonin is also not regulated, so ingredients can vary. And so it's really important to talk with the pharmacist if you're using melatonin to make sure that it's a higher end brand, and that it's a brand that's known to be consistent with its ingredients. The challenge too, and you can kind of look up Dr. Matthew Walker, he was the first quote we talked about. And the other thing he talks about is that sedated sleep. When you're on medication, it's essentially sedated sleep. It's sedation, it's not sleep. You're not always going through all of your sleep cycles. You're usually not hitting your deep sleep as much and not spending as much time in REM sleep. So it kind of goes back to the caffeine and, I sleep when I drink coffee, but do you really sleep? Is it really quality sleep? So we do work with families with medication to answer why, and we work with other professionals who want to talk with the doctor. We want to talk with all medical professionals. It's not our job to take you off medication, but we want to make sure we're talking with the entire team about why it's being used and how we can tackle sleep and achieve healthy sleep, perhaps without it. To extend sleep. So are there any strategies you recommend to extend sleep? So somebody automatically waking up after 4 to 5 hours. That sort of ties in with the first time you may naturally wake. So within your sleep cycle, I don't know if we can go back to that slide, but within your natural sleep cycles, you do hit a point where you naturally wake. That could be the timing there where they're naturally waking. So if you kind of look at those gaps there, yeah. So depending on when a child falls asleep and when they wake up, take a look at that timing. It could be it's when they naturally wake up. They're just becoming fully alert and awake. And I might take a look at sleep dependencies there to see if there's an issue. Does that make sense?
Just being mindful of time. I mean, do we want to open up Q&As and then we can post these checklists on the Facebook group as well? Or if you would like a copy of them, we can, if you just want to put your email in the slide, we have a couple of healthy habits checklists that we're happy to send your way. Because we only have like a few minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat. Candace, that's great.
Yeah. And I find the timing of the medication, particularly medications for ADHD, is important. I know not just for the effect that it would have on those symptoms of ADHD, but also just the timing because it is a stimulant and so it can interfere with sleep. Perspective on the sleep Ferber method being cried out, correct? Yeah, I have a lot to say on that. I think when parents should feel comfortable choosing what works for them and what works for their child. So somebody that wants to use extinction, that's what that is. So extinction is when you interrupt reinforcement. So typically cried out would be used for kids where, you want mom to come in or you're asking for things and I'm just not going to give you those things. We're not going to do that anymore. That's extinction. But then there's an emotional reaction, and that's a common side effect of extinction in our research, that there will be an emotional side effect to that. There will be an emotional reaction to no longer meeting that need. We don't include cried out in our recommendations. We try different approaches. We do try ones, I'm not going to use the word gentle because sleep training really can never be completely gentle. Most kids don't like having their routines shifted. So there will always be some sort of reaction. But when it comes to cry it out, it can be effective. It is effective. It does the job. There's research that supports it. There's research that says it does harm. There's also research that says that it doesn't. I feel like parents need to be given permission to use whatever works for them. So there's no judgment when it comes to cry it out. It's not one that we recommend right off the bat. So we work with families to find a plan that works for them. And if that's a route eventually they would like to go, we will support them in doing it properly, safely, and taking into account the child, their needs, and making sure it's appropriately done. Does that answer your question? Okay.
All right, is there any more questions? I'll leave these healthy sleep tips up on here. We came up with these checklists just so that everyone can have like a simple, some easy things to make changes right now, just to some healthy sleep habits to be considerate of. We got our consistent meals, so having meals at regular times throughout the day, consistent wake and sleep times, so making sure we're going to sleep around the same time, waking up around the same time, even though if it's a weekend, Limiting fluids, this one is the one that I struggle with always. But avoiding liquids too close to bedtime, otherwise you'll be up in the night. Yeah, baths are dependent. So baths can be overstimulating for some, and it depends how hot the bath is too. But that's, it's like, you don't want it to be a hot tub. So you don't want your internal temperature to go up too high or your body to become overstimulated, because it needs to be at a lower level for sleep. Our temperature actually drops right before bed. So heating it up isn't really helpful. Sugar and caffeine, of course, avoiding those as much as you can close to bedtime, physical activity during the day, and maximizing the light dark. Yeah, exercise done most away from bedtime. So not too late in the day, as it does increase our cortisol levels and our alertness. So allowing some space to have your body to wind down and kind of reset is really helpful right before bed. Yoga is good though. Doing some like soft, gentle yoga before bed would be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your body temperature actually drops before sleep. That's one of the things that triggers your sleep system, is your body temperature drops by a few degrees. So when you heat it up right before bed, you kind of shut that part down. So you just want to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Questions are quiet, so I think, if everyone's feeling good, that's great. Feel free to email us if you have any questions afterwards. Our email is at info@healthysleepsolutions.ca. We're also on Instagram at healthysleep.solutions. And you'll see us in the picture, so you'll know it's our account. And yeah, follow us for sleep tips, or if you ever want to contact us to learn more, we do offer a free 15-minute discovery call. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Nicole and Hilary. This is like a very helpful talk. Personally, I learned a lot. So yeah, feel free to follow Nicole and Hilary and email them. And yeah, have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.